The first lie anyone ever told about me wasn't that I was unemployed. It was that I had no ambition. I heard my mother say it through a half-open dining room door while I was still holding a gift bag in one hand and my motorcycle helmet in the other. "Please," she whispered to someone inside, her voice tight with embarrassment. "Just don't ask him too many questions about work. He's between things." A pause. Then my younger sister laughed. "No, Mom, just introduce him as my unemployed brother. It's easier." The room answered with polite chuckles. I didn't walk in. I stood perfectly still, staring at the tiny gold ribbon on the gift bag until it blurred. Funny thing about humiliation, it doesn't always hit like a slap. Sometimes it arrives like winter, silent, slow, and impossible to ignore. I could have turned around. I almost did. Instead, I smiled, because none of them knew why I hadn't had a traditional job in almost 3 years, and for the first time in my life, I decided they deserved not to know. My name is Valor Soren. Most people assume unusual names come with unusual lives. Mine certainly did. I wasn't unemployed because nobody would hire me. I simply refused to let my work belong to someone else anymore. 3 years earlier, I'd resigned from one of the largest architectural firms in the country after watching an entire low-income housing project get canceled because luxury apartments promised better margins. That day, I'd walked away without another job waiting. Everyone called it reckless. My father called it stupidity. You threw away stability chasing ideals. Maybe I just got tired of watching beautiful buildings become monuments to greed. Since then, I'd spent every waking hour designing adaptive public spaces, libraries that doubled as storm shelters, abandoned factories transformed into schools, modular clinics that could be assembled in disaster zones. None of it paid well. Sometimes it didn't pay at all. Most of my income came from consulting contracts that lasted a few weeks before disappearing again. On paper, it looked like unemployment. My family never cared enough to ask for the full story. Eventually, I stopped offering it. The dinner was being held at an old vineyard converted into an event estate. Not extravagant, just expensive enough for everyone to pretend they belonged there. My sister, Lysen, spotted me before anyone else. "You actually came." I was invited. Barely. She forced a smile as she hugged me. "You look tired?" I was going to say casual. I looked down. Dark jeans, plain black shirt, scuffed boots. Compared to the tailored suits surrounding us, I might as well have been delivering furniture. She leaned closer. "I need one favor." "I know." "You do?" "You don't want me embarrassing you." Her smile froze. "Mom already told you?" I heard enough. For a second, something like guilt flickered across her face. Then it vanished. "You know how people judge?" "No." "I mean, they judge families." I nodded. "They do." Satisfied I'd accepted it, she squeezed my arm. "Thank you." What she didn't realize, I wasn't thanking her. I was remembering. Her fiancé arrived 20 minutes later. His name was Cadric Vale, tall, composed, one of those men whose confidence seemed stitched directly into his tailored jacket. Everyone greeted him like he'd already become family, except me, not because I disliked him, because I watched. Observation had become a habit after architecture. Buildings told stories through tiny imperfections. People did too. Cadric shook every hand, remembered every name, complimented the chef, helped an elderly aunt adjust her chair without anyone noticing. That wasn't performance. Performance always searched for an audience. Kindness rarely did. Interesting. Maybe my sister had chosen well. Then she ruined it. "Lysen," my mother called loudly. "Introduce your brother." The room quieted. Lysen laughed awkwardly. "This is Valor." Tiny pause. "My unemployed brother." Silence. Not complete silence.
the kind filled with polite smiles, understanding nods, instant assumptions. Kadrick extended his hand anyway. "Nice meeting you." His handshake was firm, respectful, no pity. "What do you do?" he asked. Before I answered, my father cut in. "He's figuring life out." More laughter. Someone joked about parents never retiring because of adult children. Another guest asked whether I'd tried applying to government offices. I answered none of them. Instead, I asked Kadrick a question. "What do you do when nobody believes your work matters?" He blinked. "I've never been asked that." I noticed. He thought for several seconds, longer than anyone else at the table thought acceptable. Finally, "You keep doing it until reality speaks louder than opinions." Interesting answer. Honest. My sister interrupted before the conversation could continue. Anyway, she pulled him toward another group, leaving me standing alone.
Dinner unfolded exactly as expected. Questions carefully avoided, conversations redirected whenever I approached. At one point, an uncle slid a folded business card toward me. "I know a warehouse manager." I smiled. "Keep it. It's honest work." "So is mine." He frowned. "I thought you said—" "I didn't." He stared, then quietly pocketed the card. About halfway through dessert, rain began falling outside. Not gentle rain, a summer storm. Lightning flashed beyond the vineyard windows. Guests gathered near the glass to admire it. Someone joked the wedding photos next year would be dramatic. That's when I noticed Kadrick standing beside me. "They underestimate you." I didn't look at him. "Why?" "Because everyone here speaks about you." "But not to me?" "Exactly." He sipped his coffee. "I've spent years negotiating acquisitions." "So?" "People reveal themselves when discussing someone they assume can't affect their future." I smiled despite myself. "That's a depressing skill." "It's profitable." For a while, we simply watched the rain. Then he asked quietly, "So what is it you actually do?" Before I could answer, a woman rushed into the dining hall soaked from head to toe. Her breathing was ragged. One of the vineyard's historic retaining walls had partially collapsed under the sudden rain. Water was flooding toward the lower guest cottages. The estate manager looked panicked. Engineers wouldn't arrive until morning. Guests immediately started gathering handbags and car keys. Voices overlapped. Everyone talked. Nobody acted. Then the manager shouted something that made the entire room fall silent. "If we don't redirect the runoff in the next 30 minutes, the foundation under the oldest building could fail." And for the first time that night, every eye in the room slowly turned toward the family's unemployed brother. No one actually asked me for help. They just looked at me. It was strange. 5 minutes earlier, I was invisible. Now, I had become everyone's last option. The estate manager hurried toward us, soaked through, his hands trembling around a rolled-up site map. "Does anyone here know structural engineering?" Silence. My father looked away. My uncle studied his shoes. One guest quietly whispered, "Didn't he used to design something?" Used to. Funny how quickly people rewrite your life. I stepped toward the manager. "I'm an architect." He blinked with visible relief. "Oh, thank God." My mother immediately interrupted. "He's not exactly practicing." I ignored her. "Show me the plans." The map spread across a wooden wine barrel. Rain hammered against the windows hard enough to make conversation difficult. The manager pointed toward the lower vineyard. The retaining wall gave way here. Water was racing downhill. If it reached the oldest stone guest house, the saturated soil could undermine the foundation before sunrise. How old is the building? Nearly 140 years. Original foundation? Mostly. I studied the drainage routes. Something felt wrong. Very wrong.
The wall isn't the real problem. The manager frowned. What do you mean? I traced a finger across the map. This drainage line should be carrying excess water into the orchard. He leaned closer. It isn't. No. Why? I looked outside. Because someone physically blocked it. The room became quiet. You can tell that from a map? One guest asked skeptically. No. I can tell. Because this amount of flooding shouldn't exist if the channel were open. The manager grabbed his radio. Check the overflow gate, right now.
5 agonizing minutes passed. Everyone stood frozen. The radio crackled. A voice answered through heavy rain. Gates blocked. Another pause. With concrete. Every conversation stopped. Concrete. Not debris, not mud. Concrete. The manager looked horrified. Who would do that? I didn't answer, because I was asking myself a different question. Why? Nobody poured concrete into a drainage channel by accident. Within minutes, staff began organizing sandbags. I walked outside into the storm. Cold rain hit like thrown gravel. Kadrick followed without saying a word. You don't have to come. I know. Then why are you? He smiled faintly. I'd rather be useful than dry. For the first time that evening, I laughed.
The damaged retaining wall wasn't catastrophic. It was surgical, almost too precise. Sections had collapsed exactly where water pressure would be highest. I knelt beside the fractured stone. Fresh tool marks, not weather damage. Someone had weakened it. Recently, I ran my fingers along a crack. The mortar inside was strangely soft. I scraped a little into my palm. Wrong mixture. Cheap. Temporary. Whoever repaired this wall had knowingly used inferior materials. My stomach tightened. This wasn't neglect. Kadrick crouched beside me. What are you seeing? A shortcut. Meaning? Someone repaired a historic retaining wall with material that was never meant to last. He stared at the stones. You sound certain. I am.
Staff returned from the overflow channel. Their flashlights cut through the rain. One carried a broken chunk of gray concrete. Fresh, still lighter than weathered cement. It was poured recently. The manager looked sick. We renovated 6 months ago. I slowly stood. Who handled the renovation? He answered without hesitation. ArcLight Heritage Restoration. The name meant nothing to me until Kadrick quietly spoke. I know them. You do? They've been bidding on municipal preservation contracts. He frowned. They've been expanding unusually fast. By midnight, volunteers had redirected enough water to stabilize the hillside. The guest house survived. Barely. Nobody applauded. Everyone was too exhausted. Instead, guests gathered inside, wrapped in blankets, while staff distributed coffee. My father finally approached. You handled yourself well. I looked at him. That was it. Not, I'm proud. Not, I was wrong. Just, you handled yourself well. I've always handled myself well. He had no answer.
Lisen found me drawing my jacket near the fireplace. I owe you an apology. I waited. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. I shouldn't have introduced you that way. No. I was nervous. I know. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know. She frowned. Then why do you sound so distant? Because apologies don't erase choices. But I didn't say that. Instead, I asked, have you ever wondered why you believed everyone else's definition of success before asking mine? Her eyes filled with frustration. I just wanted tonight to go smoothly. It did. She looked around the room. The retaining wall collapsed. No. I met her gaze. Something else collapsed. She didn't understand. Not yet. As guests prepared to leave, the estate manager hurried back inside. His face had completely changed. Not panic, shock. He walked straight toward me. "Mr. Soren, you need to see this."
He led me into a small administrative office overlooking the vineyard. Several security monitors covered one wall. Rain blurred most of the footage. The manager rewound the recording. There, a grainy image appeared. Earlier that afternoon, hours before guests arrived, a utility truck stopped near the damaged retaining wall. 3 workers unloaded equipment. One of them carried bags labeled restoration mortar. Another wheeled a portable cement mixer. They stayed only 18 minutes, then left. The timestamp made my chest tighten. They came today. The manager nodded. They weren't scheduled. He switched to another camera. This one overlooked the maintenance road. The truck's company logo was barely visible through the rain. ArcLight Heritage Restoration. Exactly the company Kadrick had mentioned. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the passenger climbing out of the truck. Even through the blurry footage, I recognized him. I'd met him once, almost 2 years earlier. He'd attended a public design forum where I criticized contractors who cut corners on historical restoration projects. He'd smiled through the entire discussion. Then afterward, he quietly told me, "You'll learn that integrity doesn't win contracts." At the time, I dismissed him as another bitter executive. Now, he was standing beside a wall that mysteriously failed on the exact night of one of the region's most high-profile private events. Coincidence? My instincts screamed otherwise. Kadrick stepped closer to the monitor. His expression changed, slowly, then completely. "You know him?" I asked. He nodded once. I wish I didn't. "Who is he?" He looked at the frozen image for several long seconds, then turned toward me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Veiler. That's the company my family hired to restore my late grandfather's estate." My pulse stopped. "And after tonight, I think this isn't the first wall they've made fail on purpose." The office fell silent. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Inside, something much bigger than my family's humiliation had just begun. I didn't sleep, not because of the storm, because once you notice a pattern, your mind refuses to let it go. If ArcLight Heritage Restoration had deliberately weakened structures, tonight wasn't an accident, it was a business model. And if that was true, then my family's opinion of me had become the least interesting problem in the room. The next morning, the vineyard looked strangely peaceful. Broken branches lay scattered between rows of vines, but the oldest guest house still stood. Barely. Workers inspected the hillside, while insurance representatives arrived carrying clipboards and cameras. The estate manager, Brannick, found me near the damaged wall. "I've delayed authorizing cleanup." "Good. You think someone should document everything first?" "I think someone should document it before evidence disappears." He nodded. "I've contacted the Regional Preservation Authority." "Excellent." He hesitated. "Would you be willing to explain what you noticed?" "I'll explain exactly what I observed, not what I suspected. Observations survive scrutiny. Assumptions don't." Around noon, a white SUV rolled through the vineyard gates. 3 people stepped out, a woman carrying a laser scanner, an older man with a weathered notebook, and another with a case full of measuring instruments. Independent forensic engineers. Not hired by me, not hired by the estate, requested by the Preservation Authority because the building held historical status. Perfect. Truth works best when it belongs to no one. My family watched from the terrace. Nobody came over. They didn't know whether I was a witness, a consultant, or simply standing where I wasn't supposed to. Only Kadrick joined me. "You called them?" "No." He smiled. "I was hoping you hadn't." "Why?" "Because then no one can claim you're controlling the outcome."
He was learning how I thought, or maybe I'd underestimated how he already did. The forensic team worked for hours. They laser-scanned fractures, collected mortar samples, measured drainage gradients, photographed tool marks. No drama, just patience. The kind of patience truth demands. Late in the afternoon, the oldest engineer approached Brannick. He didn't lower his voice, perhaps intentionally. "We've confirmed multiple repair materials." Brannick frowned. "Meaning?" "The wall contains original stonework, legitimate restoration from years ago." He paused. "And a third section. The failed section." "Yes." He looked almost offended. "It was patched using a low-strength mix completely unsuitable for retaining structures." A silence settled over everyone nearby. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "It appears the defective section was designed to appear stable until sustained hydraulic pressure exposed the weakness." Designed, not neglected. Designed.
Word spread quickly. Insurance investigators immediately halted the estate's claim, not to deny it, to widen it. This was no longer weather damage, it was potential construction fraud. Within hours, ArcLight Heritage Restoration's representatives arrived, looking irritated more than concerned. Their operations director stepped out first. I recognized him instantly. The same man from the security footage, the same man from the design forum. His name was Terran Voss. He spotted me. Recognition flickered across his face. "You." "Me." He forced a smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I imagine there are many things you didn't expect." He folded his arms. "Be careful making accusations." "I haven't made any." He blinked. "I've only described what I observed." That seemed to bother him more, because observations don't argue, they accumulate. The Preservation Authority requested access to ArcLight's repair records. Terran confidently handed over digital files, invoices, material certifications, inspection approvals. Everything looked immaculate, almost too immaculate. The lead investigators studied them for several minutes before asking one simple question. "May we compare these records with the manufacturer's production batch numbers?" Terran's confidence disappeared. Only for a second, but I saw it. So did Kadrick. The manufacturer responded before sunset. The certified structural mortar listed in ArcLight's documentation had never been delivered to the vineyard. Not once. The batch numbers belonged to an entirely different restoration project nearly 200 miles away. Someone had copied documentation from another site. The room became very quiet. The investigator calmly closed the folder. "I believe we're finished discussing weather." Everything after that happened surprisingly fast. The Preservation Authority expanded its audit. Municipalities reviewed ArcLight's previous contracts. Insurance companies reopened old structural failure claims. Historic property owners requested independent inspections. Not because I accused anyone, because records now contradicted reality. Truth has a way of recruiting people. 3 weeks later, I received a letter, not from my family, from the Regional Preservation Council. They weren't offering me a job, they were asking something much more meaningful. Would I help create new independent review standards for restoration projects involving protected historic buildings? Not as an employee, as an external advisor, someone whose role was to question assumptions before concrete covered them forever. For the first time in years, the work I'd chosen over comfort wasn't being treated as impractical. It had become useful precisely because I'd refused to compromise it. My family asked to meet. Not at home, not at a restaurant, at the small public library where I spent most afternoons sketching adaptive community buildings. Interesting choice, maybe because libraries are quiet, or because they're places where people come hoping to understand something.
Lysen arrived first. She sat across from me without speaking. Finally, she slid a folded photograph across the table. It was from our childhood, the two of us building a crooked treehouse with scrap wood. She smiled sadly. "You remember what you kept saying?" I looked closer. I actually did. "It doesn't have to look expensive." She nodded. "It just has to hold." We sat with that memory for a while. Then she whispered, "I forgot who you were long before that dinner." There was no dramatic apology, no tears, no performance, just an honest sentence. Sometimes that's heavier. My father came next. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he looked around the library, at children reading, at elderly volunteers organizing donated books, at the community bulletin board. "I never understood why places like this mattered so much to you." I answered quietly, "Because they're built for people who aren't expected to impress anyone." He slowly sat down. "I judged your paycheck. You judged visibility." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You respected work people could recognize. Construction cranes, corporate offices, job titles. But the most important work often disappears into other people's lives." He looked around again. Really looked, for once. "I spent years asking why you wouldn't choose a safer career. And now? I should have asked whether you were proud of the one you already had." That was the closest thing to an apology my father knew how to give. It was enough. Not because everything was repaired, because pretending otherwise would only create another weak foundation.
Kadrick found me outside as evening settled over the library courtyard. "Lysen told me you're speaking at the Preservation Council next month." "I am." "You nervous?" "Terrified." He laughed. "Good." "Good? The people who stop being nervous are usually the dangerous ones." We walked in comfortable silence. Finally, he stopped. "I owe you something." "You don't." "I do." He reached into his jacket and handed me a wedding invitation. No special note, no dramatic gesture, just my name, printed exactly the same size as everyone else's. No labels, no explanations, no embarrassment. Just Valor Soren. Months later, I stood before architects, historians, engineers, contractors, and public officials. I wasn't there because I'd exposed anyone. I was there because I'd spent years asking uncomfortable questions before anyone wanted the answers. Near the end of my presentation, someone asked the question I'd heard in different forms my entire adult life. "So, what would you say to people who think meaningful work only counts if it's financially impressive?" I smiled, then answered with the truth my family had unknowingly taught me. The easiest thing in the world is to measure a person's income. I paused. The hardest thing is measuring what quietly stays standing because they refuse to build it the wrong way. The room was silent. Not out of politeness, out of recognition. And in that silence, I finally understood something. My revenge had never been exposing my family's assumptions. It wasn't watching a dishonest company collapse under the weight of its own shortcuts. It wasn't proving strangers wrong. The real revenge was that the label they had used to shrink my life, unemployed, became completely irrelevant the moment the truth started doing the talking. If this story stayed with you, let me ask you one question. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you the most? Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't getting even. It's refusing to become the person they expected you to be. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new emotional revenge story. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What was the moment that changed everything for you in this story? Was it the introduction, the storm, or the ending?
Your comments inspire future stories, and I read as many of them as I can. Thank you for spending your time here with me. Until next time, remember, the truth has a way of revealing itself, and character will always outlast reputation. See you in the next story.